It was an ordinary evening in the small, quiet town of Maplewood. The stars had just begun to twinkle in the sky, and the air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees and freshly cut grass. Most of the townspeople were indoors, enjoying the comfort of their homes after a long day. The sound of crickets and rustling leaves filled the night air, when suddenly a bright streak of light appeared in the sky. It moved quickly, cutting through the calm of the night like a shooting star. But this was no ordinary star. The object grew brighter, moving faster, and soon a loud echoing sound broke the peace of the evening. It was a crash, a violent earth-shattering crash that shook the ground beneath the feet of anyone who was still awake. The sound was so loud that windows rattled in nearby houses, and some people in the town even felt their walls tremble. James, a local paramedic, had just finished his shift at the small hospital and was driving back to his apartment when the crash happened. He slammed on the brakes as the bright light lit up the sky. His first thought was that it might have been a plane, but there was something strange about the way it fell. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen. He decided to investigate. Following the direction of the crash, James sped down a narrow road that led to the woods at the edge of town. It wasn't long before he saw the smoke rising in the distance. He parked his car at the side of the road and grabbed his flashlight, his heart pounding. The forest was dark and the trees loomed like shadows, but the light of the wreckage made it easier to see. The closer he got, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary crash. The ground was scorched and the trees near the wreckage were bent and burned. What remained of the object was unrecognizable, but there were odd markings on it, like symbols or strange shapes that James couldn't make sense of. His breath caught in his throat. Was it a spacecraft? He had read about UFO sightings, of course, but he never imagined he would be standing in front of something like this. He took a cautious step forward and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" At first there was no answer. The night was eerily quiet except for the crackling of fire from the wreckage. James stepped closer, shining his flashlight around. That's when he saw her, standing by the wreckage. A girl no older than 10 or 11 was looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. She was thin, her skin pale but with a strange greenish tint, almost glowing in the dim light. Her clothes were torn and dirty, but there was something unusual about her. Her large, dark eyes seemed to reflect the light like mirrors, and she had an air of someone who didn't belong to this world. "Are you okay?" James asked, his voice gentle, not wanting to startle her further. The girl didn't respond at first, just staring at him as if unsure of who he was. Then in a trembling voice she spoke, "Please, my mom won't wake up." Her words sent a chill through James. She was so small, so fragile, and yet the weight of her words felt immense. Without thinking, he dropped his flashlight and rushed toward her. "Where is she?" "Where's your mom?" The girl pointed toward the wreckage. "Over there. She's hurt. I can't wake her up." James didn't waste any time. He turned and made his way through the scattered debris, looking for any signs of life. The smoke was thick, but he managed to find a part of the wreckage where the ground had been torn open, revealing a figure lying unconscious on the ground. The woman's appearance was just as strange as the girl's. Her skin had a faint, otherworldly glow, and her features were almost too perfect to be human. James knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. To his relief, there was one, but it was weak. He pulled out his phone, ready to call for backup, when he heard a voice behind him. "Who are you?" He turned around to find the girl standing a few feet away, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. James tried to reassure her with a calm voice. "I'm a paramedic. I'm here to help." The girl seemed to relax slightly but still looked worried. "Will she wake up?" "You have to help her." James nodded, though he wasn't sure how much he could do. He gently placed his hand on the woman's arm and tried to stabilize her. She seemed to be in a deep unconscious state, but she wasn't showing any signs of severe injury. It was as though her body had simply shut down, and there was no clear explanation as to why. "Don't worry," James said softly, trying to comfort the girl. "I'll take care of her. I promise." But the girl didn't seem convinced. Her eyes stayed fixed on her mother, watching every move James made. She stepped closer to him, her small hand reaching out to touch her mother's hand. "She's special. She's different from you." James paused, glancing at the girl. "What do you mean?" "She's not from here. She's from far away. We came to find a safe place," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at James, her eyes wide with fear. Please, you have to help her. She's all I have left." The words were heavy, and James felt a strange connection to the girl. He didn't understand what she meant, but her desperation was clear. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but he knew he had to do everything he could to help. "Okay," he said, standing up and pulling out his radio. "I'm going to get some help. Stay right here." He sent out a distress signal asking for immediate backup. As he waited for the response, he stayed close to the girl and her mother, trying to keep them calm in the midst of the chaos. The night felt strangely still, and the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant hum of the sirens approaching. The girl never left her mother's side, and James couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility toward them both. Whoever they were, whatever they were, he was now part of their story, whether he was ready for it or not. The night had fallen deep, and the only sounds in the woods were the crackling of the fire from the wreckage and the distant howls of the wind. James stood in the clearing, staring down at the unconscious woman, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His mind raced, questions flooding in without answers. Who were they? What was this strange ship, and how had it come to crash here in the middle of nowhere? But there was no time for answers just yet. His first priority was getting help. He knew the local hospital had a small emergency team, but this situation was unlike anything they had ever dealt with. A spaceship had crashed, an alien girl was standing before him, and a woman, who seemed to be from another world entirely, lay unconscious. As he waited for the response on his radio, he couldn't help but glance over at the girl. Her eyes were locked on her mother, her small hand still gripping her mother's. The worry on her face was palpable, and it tugged at James's heart. Despite everything that was happening, despite the strange circumstances, she was just a child scared and alone, trying to protect the only family she had left. James crouched down next to her, trying to offer comfort. "It's okay," he said gently. "Help is on the way. They'll take care of her." The girl nodded, but she didn't speak. Her wide, dark eyes never left her mother's face, as though she believed that if she blinked, something terrible might happen. James could see how much she loved her mother, how deeply she cared. It made his heart ache. Just then, a voice crackled through his radio. "James, do you copy? We're on our way, but it's going to take a while to get there. The road's pretty bad out there." James sighed with relief. "I copy. Just get here as fast as you can. We have an injured woman, and she's not from around here." There was a long pause before the voice on the other end responded. "Understood. We'll be there soon." James put the radio back in its holder and turned to the girl again. "What's your name?" he asked softly, hoping to ease her anxiety. She blinked, her expression still distant and worried. It seemed like she was thinking hard before she finally answered, her voice small and uncertain. "Aaliyah," she whispered. "My name is Aaliyah." "That's a beautiful name, Aaliyah," James said, trying to give her a reassuring smile. He wasn't sure if it helped, but it seemed to make her relax just a little. Aaliyah looked up at him, her face filled with confusion. "You're not like us, are you?" she asked. James froze, surprised by the question. He had assumed she didn't fully understand the difference between humans and aliens. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that she probably knew far more than he did. "I'm human," he answered cautiously. "I don't know what you mean by us, but I'm here to help." Aaliyah's eyes widened as she took a step back, still clutching her mother's hand. "You're from this world," she said slowly, as if trying to make sense of it. "But we're not. We don't belong here." James's heart skipped a beat. "Where do you come from, Aaliyah?" She looked up at the sky, her eyes distant as though she was searching for the answer among the stars. "From far away, from a place called Celestra," she said, almost like she was telling a story. "It's a beautiful world, but it's gone now. Our people, they're all gone." James felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say. The weight of her words was heavy, and he could see the sadness in her eyes. Whatever had happened to her world, it had left deep scars. She had lost everything, her home, her people, her safety. All she had left was her mother, and now even she was in danger. "Celestra," James repeated quietly, trying to understand the enormity of what she was saying. "I'm sorry, Aaliyah. I can't imagine what you've been through." Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes scanning the wreckage of the ship, the flames flickering in the distance. She pulled her mother's hand closer to her chest, as if holding on to what little she had left. James wanted to ask more questions, but he knew it wasn't the right time. He needed to focus on getting the woman help, and that meant waiting for the rescue team to arrive. It was hard to ignore the sense of urgency that kept gnawing at him. The woman needed medical attention, and Aaliyah needed reassurance that she wasn't alone. Minutes passed and the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Finally, a group of paramedics and emergency personnel arrived, their vehicles lighting up the dark woods. They quickly gathered around, taking in the scene and assessing the situation. "James, what do we have here?" one of the paramedics asked, looking around in disbelief at the wreckage. "It's an alien ship," James said, his voice steady, despite the shock of it all. "There's a woman inside who's hurt, but she's not from this world. And the girl, she's her daughter. Her name is Aaliyah." The paramedics exchanged looks, unsure of how to proceed. "Is she injured?" the lead paramedic asked, gesturing toward Aaliyah. "No," James replied. "She's not hurt, but she's been through a lot. She needs help too." The emergency team quickly got to work, moving the unconscious woman onto a stretcher and preparing to transport her back to the hospital. They were careful, trying to avoid causing further injury, but their eyes were filled with questions. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. Aaliyah remained close by, watching every move they made, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't speaking now, but James could see the worry written all over her face. He stayed close to her, offering silent support. "Aaliyah," he said gently, "we're going to take your mom to the hospital. She'll get better there, okay?" Aaliyah nodded slowly, but her eyes were still filled with uncertainty. "Will she be safe there?" she asked, her voice trembling. James bent down to her level, offering her a comforting smile. "Yes, I promise. They'll take care of her, and we'll be right here with you." The moment he said those words, James realized just how much responsibility he had taken on. This little girl, with her glowing eyes and strange otherworldly appearance, was now his responsibility. He had to protect her to make sure she was safe. As the paramedics loaded the unconscious woman into the ambulance, James stayed close to Aaliyah. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he knew that deep down, she wasn't just scared for her mother. She was scared for herself, for what might happen next. But James was determined. He wasn't going to leave her. Not now, not ever. He didn't know what the future held, or what secrets Aaliyah and her mother were hiding. But one thing was certain. He was going to be there for her. And as the ambulance doors closed and the sirens began to fade into the distance, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the night had in store. Part 3. The Discovery. The hospital was a small, quiet place tucked away in the corner of the town. It had never seen anything quite like what was unfolding tonight. As the ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance, the staff rushed to meet it. The paramedics carefully wheeled the unconscious woman into the hospital, her body still and pale. Aaliyah, still gripping James's hand tightly, followed them in silence, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. James had called ahead, explaining as best he could about the woman's condition and the strange circumstances. The doctors and nurses were already on high alert, prepared to handle an emergency, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to face. The hospital staff led the woman into a secure room, where they began to assess her injuries. James stayed close by, trying his best to comfort Aaliyah, who looked out of place in the sterile, brightly lit hospital environment. The young girl clung to him, her eyes darting around the room, unsure of what to expect next. She had never seen a place like this before, and the bright lights, the white walls, and the bustling people were overwhelming for her. "Aaliyah," James said softly, kneeling down so he could look her in the eyes. "They're going to take care of your mom now. Everything is going to be okay. You're safe here." Aaliyah nodded slowly but didn't speak. She had hardly spoken since the crash. James could see the weight of her thoughts in her eyes, the uncertainty about what had just happened and the fear of what might come next. He gently rubbed her back, trying to comfort her. "You're not alone," he continued. "I'm here. We're all here to help." Aaliyah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that made James's heart ache. "Will she be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so," James answered, offering a small smile. "I'm sure they'll do everything they can." The doctors and nurses were working fast. They ran a series of tests, trying to figure out what had caused the woman's condition. Her vitals were weak, and though she didn't show any external injuries, something about her body seemed different. It was almost as if she wasn't entirely human, and the doctors didn't know how to explain it. One of the doctors, Dr. Harper, was looking at the results from a scan when he turned to James. "We're not sure what we're dealing with here," Dr. Harper said. "Her blood work shows unusual readings. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." James furrowed his brow. "What do you mean? What's wrong with her?" Dr. Harper sighed. "We don't know. Her cells are behaving differently, almost like they're not human. Her physiology doesn't match any known species on Earth. And her brain activity, it's strange. It's almost like she's in a deep hibernation or stasis. We're still running tests, but I don't think she's from around here." James's heart sank. The woman wasn't just injured, she was alien. There was no other word for it. He looked over at Aaliyah, who was still standing beside him, staring at her mother through the glass window of the room. She had heard every word, and the look in her eyes told him that she knew what the doctors were saying was true. Aaliyah finally spoke again, her voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and fear. "You found her." "You found her, didn't you?" James nodded. "I did. She's going to be okay. We're going to do everything we can to help her." Aaliyah bit her lip, glancing down at the floor. Her small hands were clasped tightly together. "She's not from here," she whispered almost to herself. "She's not like you." James crouched down to her level. "I know, but that doesn't change anything. We'll help her, Aaliyah. We'll figure this out together." Aaliyah's eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. She nodded slowly, but James could tell she was struggling to believe him. The world she had known was gone, and now she was surrounded by people who didn't understand her, who couldn't even comprehend what she was going through. She felt alone. Dr. Harper came back into the room, interrupting their conversation. "James, we need you to come with me," he said. "We've made some discoveries that you need to see." James stood up and gave Aaliyah a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Aaliyah nodded, but her eyes followed him as he left the room. Dr. Harper led him to a small lab in the back of the hospital. There, a few technicians were working with the medical equipment, running additional scans and tests. The data was being displayed on a large screen, and when James walked over, he saw the results. "We've run a genetic analysis on her tissue," Dr. Harper explained. "We're still analyzing the results, but one thing is clear. This woman is not human. Her DNA is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's as though her genetic structure was built from scratch, something completely foreign to Earth." James stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "So she's not from Earth?" Dr. Harper shook his head. "It's not just that. Her body is different in ways that we can't explain. Her cells regenerate at an accelerated rate. Her brain is functioning in ways that are impossible for a human to understand. It's like her entire biology was designed to survive in a completely different environment." James ran his hand through his hair, trying to process the information. "But what does that mean for her? Will she be okay?" "We don't know," Dr. Harper replied honestly. "We need more time to study her. But for now, we'll keep her stabilized. We're also going to keep an eye on her daughter, Aaliyah. She's not physically harmed, but her emotional state is fragile. We need to make sure she's taken care of, too." James nodded. He had been thinking about Aaliyah, too. She was in an entirely different kind of danger, one that no one could understand. Her world had been shattered, and now she was surrounded by strangers who couldn't even begin to comprehend the magnitude of what she had experienced. "I'll stay with her," James said, determination in his voice. "I can keep an eye on her. She's been through a lot." Dr. Harper gave him a nod. "That's a good idea. You're the one person she seems to trust right now. Just be careful. This situation is unlike anything we've ever faced. We have no idea what's going to happen next." James didn't respond immediately. His mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. An alien crash landing, a woman who was not from Earth, and a young girl who had lost everything. But one thing was clear. He couldn't turn his back on them. He had to help. As he walked back to Aaliyah, his heart was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. There were so many unknowns, so many questions that no one could answer. But for the first time, he felt a sense of responsibility, not just for the woman in the hospital bed, but for the little girl who had no one left in this strange world. James knew he would do whatever it took to protect her. And as he entered the room, Aaliyah's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. He smiled, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure how. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to leave her alone. The days following the crash were strange for both James and Aaliyah. The small hospital in Maplewood, once quiet and peaceful, was now buzzing with activity. Doctors, scientists, and government officials came and went, all trying to understand what had happened and who the woman and her daughter really were. But through it all, one thing remained certain. Aaliyah needed someone she could trust. And that someone, it seemed, was James. James had never imagined that his job as a paramedic would lead him into something so far out of the ordinary. At first, he had just been trying to help a child in distress, but now, he found himself in the middle of something much bigger. The woman in the hospital, whose name he still didn't know, was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. And Aaliyah, the small alien girl, was just as mysterious. The scientists at the hospital had done their best to examine the woman, but their results only raised more questions. Her biology was completely foreign to anything they had studied, and they had no idea how she had ended up on Earth, or where she had come from. But there was one thing they knew for sure. She was in a deep, almost comatose state, and they had no idea how to wake her up. All they could do was monitor her condition and hope for the best. Meanwhile, Aaliyah had been staying with James at his small apartment. He had offered to take care of her while the doctors focused on her mother, and she had reluctantly agreed. She had no family left, and the thought of being alone in the hospital room terrified her. At first, James wasn't sure how to help. He couldn't explain what had happened or why they were here. All he could do was offer her comfort. Aaliyah spent her days sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the trees and the distant hills. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was only in whispers. Her small hands were always fidgeting with something, a pencil, a piece of paper, or her mother's pendant, which she had refused to take off. James had noticed how attached she was to the pendant, as though it held some kind of power or connection to her past life. One evening, as the sky turned purple with the setting sun, James sat across from Aaliyah at the small kitchen table. He had tried to start a conversation with her earlier, but she had been quiet, lost in her own world. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. "Aaliyah," he said softly, "do you want to talk about your home, your world, where you come from?" At first, there was no response. Aaliyah kept her eyes on the pendant, running her fingers over the smooth surface. But after a moment, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with an emotion James couldn't quite place. "I want to go home," she whispered. "But I can't, my world. It's gone. I don't know what happened. We were safe, and then everything changed. I don't understand. We were just trying to survive." James felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't even imagine what she had been through. Losing everything, the life you knew, your friends, your family, was something no one should have to experience. But Aaliyah had lost more than just her home. She had lost the very foundation of her existence. "I'm sorry, Aaliyah," he said, his voice thick with sympathy. "I can't begin to understand what you're feeling. But I'm here for you. You're not alone." Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I don't want to be alone," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how to stay here. I don't belong here." James reached out, gently taking her hand. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to figure everything out right now. You're safe here, and I'll make sure you stay safe. You don't have to go through this alone." For the first time since they had arrived, Aaliyah smiled. It was small, but it was enough to make James's heart feel lighter. He had seen how much pain she was in, and he knew that. While he couldn't fix everything, he could offer her something that was more important than anything else. His presence, his support, and his friendship. The days turned into weeks, and Aaliyah slowly began to open up. She started to talk about her world, about the place she came from, Celestra. It was a beautiful, peaceful planet, full of vast forests, sparkling lakes, and cities that gleamed with the light of a distant sun. Her people, she said, were kind and wise. They lived in harmony with nature, and technology was designed to work alongside the planet, not against it. Aaliyah's memories of Celestra were filled with warmth and joy. She described the songs they sang, the stories they told, and the way the stars shone brightly every night. But as she spoke, a shadow crossed her face. The smile faded and her voice grew quieter. "One day everything changed," she said. "A great storm came. It wasn't a normal storm. It was something else. It destroyed everything, our cities, our homes, our people. There was nothing left." James sat quietly, listening intently. He didn't know what to say. The destruction of an entire world was beyond anything he could imagine. He couldn't even begin to fathom what Aaliyah had witnessed. "We tried to escape," Aaliyah continued, her voice breaking. "We tried to leave, to find a safe place. But the ship, it crashed, and now I'm here, alone." James didn't know how to respond to that. He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate. All he could do was sit there offering her his quiet presence. And slowly, Aaliyah seemed to find comfort in that. Over time, Aaliyah began to show more signs of trust. She would sit with James in the evenings watching the sunset, or sometimes she would help him with small tasks around the apartment. She still missed her home deeply, but there was a growing bond between them, one that was built on mutual understanding, kindness, and the shared experience of feeling lost in a world that seemed too big and too unfamiliar. It wasn't long before Aaliyah began to speak less about returning to Celestra and more about finding a way to help her mother. Her mother, who had still not woken up, remained in the hospital where doctors and scientists continued their experiments in hopes of finding a solution. Aaliyah would visit her daily, her small hand pressed against the glass window as she whispered to her mother, hoping to see her eyes open again. James continued to visit both of them, always offering support. He knew that despite their differences, Aaliyah had become like family to him. He had never expected to form such a bond with an alien child, but the connection they shared was undeniable. Aaliyah had come from a place of unimaginable beauty and loss, but here, in this small town, she had found someone who cared for her, someone who would stand by her no matter what came next. And as James sat with her one evening, watching the stars appear in the sky, he couldn't help but think that perhaps their story wasn't finished yet. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future was still shrouded in mystery, but for the first time in a long while, James felt hopeful. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that no matter what, they would face it together. Weeks had passed since the crash, and the small hospital in Maplewood had become a place of constant activity. The scientists and doctors continued to study the woman who had fallen from the sky, and Aaliyah's quiet presence seemed to have become a part of the daily rhythm. But despite all the medical advancements, the one thing that remained unchanged was the fact that Aaliyah's mother had not woken up. It was as though she was locked in a deep, unbreakable slumber, her body still but her spirit absent. James had been by Aaliyah's side every day. They spent their afternoons together talking about her home, her people, and the world she had lost. But as much as Aaliyah opened up, there was always an undercurrent of sadness, a deep longing for her home that seemed impossible to erase. It was as if she was holding on to something that could never return. One evening, James stood by the hospital window, looking out at the quiet town below. The lights flickered in the distance as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the trees. Aaliyah was sitting beside her mother's bed again, her small hand pressed against the glass that separated them. She had done this every day, hoping for a sign, for some kind of miracle that would wake her mother from her deep slumber. James walked over and stood beside her. "You've been here a while," he said softly. "Are you doing okay?" Aaliyah didn't look up at him at first. She was focused on her mother, her eyes filled with worry. "I think she can hear me," Aaliyah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been talking to her every day. I tell her about our world, about Celestra. I tell her I'm here. I think she knows. I feel like she knows." James nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was possible. The woman's condition was still a mystery, and doctors had admitted they couldn't explain why she hadn't woken up. But something told James that there was more to this than just physical injury. There was a connection between Aaliyah and her mother that couldn't be explained by science alone. It was something deeper, something spiritual maybe, or something that transcended what they understood about the world. "Maybe you're right," James said, offering her a comforting smile. "I'm sure she can hear you. And I'm sure she's proud of you. You're doing your best, Aaliyah. That's all anyone can ask for." Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She just kept her eyes on her mother, her fingers tracing the edges of the glass. Finally, after a long silence, she turned to him. "James," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Do you think she'll ever wake up?" James paused, unsure of how to answer. He had spent so many hours in the hospital, watching Aaliyah's mother, wondering the same thing. He wanted to tell her something hopeful, something that would ease her fear. But the truth was, he didn't know. No one knew. "I don't know," James admitted, his voice gentle. "But I think that even if she doesn't wake up today or tomorrow, that doesn't mean she's gone. She's still with you, Aaliyah. She's still your mother. Aaliyah nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. She seemed to be thinking deeply about his words as if they were sinking in. After a few moments, she looked up at him, her expression serious. But what if she can't wake up? What if she's stuck in this place forever? James felt a pang in his chest. The thought of her mother never waking up was too painful to bear. But Aaliyah needed answers, and James couldn't ignore the truth. I don't think she's stuck, Aaliyah, he said quietly. But maybe she's waiting for something. Maybe she's waiting for you to be ready. Aaliyah blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? I mean, James said slowly, maybe your mom needs to know that you're okay. Maybe she needs to know that you're ready to move forward, that you're going to be all right no matter what happens. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, she didn't hide them. I don't want to leave her, she whispered. I don't want to leave her alone. James knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to leave her, Aaliyah. You're not alone. I'm here, and I'm sure your mom is still with you, even if she's not awake yet. She's inside you in your heart. Aaliyah closed her eyes, and for a moment the two of them sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around her mother's pendant, and James could see that she was struggling. She had already lost so much. The thought of losing her mother, whether in body or spirit, was almost too much to bear. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, a new energy seemed to fill the room. The doctors had told James that they were going to run a few more tests on Aaliyah's mother, just to see if they could find anything new. It had been a quiet night, and the staff were hopeful that maybe, just maybe, they would find something that could help. James stood by Aaliyah's side as they watched the medical team work. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, but there was also a new kind of strength. She had always been strong, but now there was something different about her. She wasn't just the frightened girl who had crash-landed on Earth anymore. She was someone who had come to terms with her loss, someone who understood the pain of losing everything and still found the strength to move forward. The morning passed in quiet anticipation, and then around noon, something unexpected happened. As Aaliyah stood by her mother's side holding her hand, the machines began to beep. It was a sound they hadn't heard in days, the sound of movement, the sound of life. Aaliyah's eyes widened as her mother's fingers twitched, then moved slightly. Mom? Aaliyah whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Mom, are you awake? For a moment it seemed like nothing was happening. But then slowly the woman's eyes fluttered open. It was as though she had been in a deep sleep, and now finally she was waking up. Her eyes met Aaliyah's, and for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of recognition. Aaliyah, the woman whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. Tears welled up in Aaliyah's eyes as she threw herself into her mother's arms. Mom, you're awake. You're really awake. James stood at the door watching the emotional reunion, his heart swelling with happiness for them both. He had never been more relieved in his life. Aaliyah's mother was alive. She was awake, and though the road ahead would still be difficult, they had taken the first step toward healing. As the woman and Aaliyah embraced, James silently stepped back, his thoughts turning to the future. The world was still full of unknowns, but one thing was certain. Aaliyah and her mother had found a home, at least for now. And James would be there, standing by their side no matter what came next.